first, when I took off from the Provo MTC to go to Lima, to the MTC there, that was a whole experience, because we got up, like 4 or 5 in the morning and left from Provo to take a flight to Georgia, and then from Georgia down to Lima. And I remember getting there at midnight, 1 in the morning, and, just in this dark airport in this foreign country, I had no idea where I was, and kind of by that point, like, so tired that I was just so awake, just past tired, and we got in a van that took us to the MTC there, and that I just remember driving through the whole city, because we had to go from one side to the other, was really interesting, just to see the city and how different it was from everything I had seen up to that point in my life. So that was a bit of a shock, but I got a little bit more used to that as I spent time in the MTC. And then when I arrived at my mission, I got sent to, my area was out in the mountains of Peru, in the Andes Mountains. And I remember our first day tracting. My companion took me out to a park, and I just remember struggling to try and speak in Spanish, to try and just get something out that we're missionaries and we can teach you. And people would just kind of look at me and be super confused. And I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And my companion was really supportive, and but at the same time, he kind of let me struggle, and kind of let me try and figure it out. And then he'd, after I ran out of words to say, he'd kind of jump in and talk. And I remember that very, very vividly, walking around that park. And yeah, it was a great experience, though, because you are quickly humbled, and I think that's what makes you teachable. And so that you can continue to better your language skills and your teaching skills. And well, the MTC here in Provo is a lot more structured, I guess you could say, in the sense of you kind of know what you got to do each day, but you also have free time to kind of do the things you like exercising and doing some other things that you kind of personally need to do. I felt like it was a little more geared towards I don't know, individual, like, preparation. I don't know if that really makes sense, but like being able to, like, be prepared for each day and feel good and kind of do the things that you need to do. And I was only in the Provo MTC for 3 weeks, and compared to the MTC in Lima, it was structured, but it was a lot more like rigid structured, where it was, okay, at this hour you have to be here, and if you're not, we're going to come looking for you, and like this and this and this. And it was very like, it was like, oh, if you need to go to the bathroom, you have to ask your teacher for permission. It was just very, I don't know, it was different. I enjoyed it a lot because I met a lot of really great people, and they pair you up with a companion who is native to South America. And that's great for learning the language and learning about the culture. The teachers are really great, because having a native teacher be able to teach you Spanish is just great, because you can pick up a lot more subtle things that will help you to improve your language skills. The food in the MTC here is a lot different than the food in the MTC in Lima. It was mostly Peruvian food that they would serve you for lunch and dinner, and you're expected to eat everything, and you weren't allowed to put your tray on the little rack to be taken away to get cleaned if you had not finished everything. And even if if you had gotten juice and you didn't like it, because they had some strange kind of drinks down there too that just we're not accustomed to, you had to drink it, because you couldn't just put it on the tray back there if you didn't like it. So we learned very quickly okay, just ask for a little bit of something, and if you want more, go back. But it was an experience that was really awesome, and one I won't soon forget, because I met most of the people that I went into the mission field with there, both from North America as well as from South America, and developed friendships in that place, and it was really great. So in the Lima East Mission, before it split, while I was there, the mission split into 2 different missions, which is kind of a testimony of how much growth is happening there with the church right now. But when I was there, we had part of the capital city of Lima, and then all the way through the Andes Mountains and towards the eastern border with Brazil, so parts of the jungle. And the church within my mission mostly were wards. We had one district with branches, which was one of the zones. But mostly they were small wards most of the time, but had been established to be wards and stakes. The church has been growing a lot since kind of in these past, I'd say 10 years or so. And it was really great for me to be there at the time I was, because we saw so many new things happen. They had only had one temple in Lima, and while I was there, they announced 2 more, one in the north and one in the south, which is huge for the people, because they would have to caravan from, the most northern provinces and come down all the way to Lima, and that was, really hard for the people to have, save up that money and to be able to come down and participate in the temple ordinances, which is, something amazing and wonderful, but just really hard for the people. So having a temple closer to them in the north and one in the south kind of divides it up and allows for a lot more people to have access to the temple now. And then as well, when I was there, they created the 100th stake, which I believe Peru is the 3rd or 4th country in the world to do that. I think it's, not including the U.S., I think it's Mexico and Brazil and then Peru. And that was awesome. It happened to be in one of the areas that I had worked in. It split that stake, and that was really awesome, because I felt like I was able to have maybe a small portion of aiding in that growth in that area. And so yeah, the church is very strong there. It has its challenges, just like any other country, with the, with inactives and trying to maintain the work and maintain the members. But it's really seen a lot of growth lately. The church hasn't been there for that long. I think in the 50s or 60s is really when the church started to actually kind of pick up there. And the temple was constructed in the 80s, and I know that was a really big thing that the early members of the church worked towards, donated a lot of money so that the temple could be built. And those early members of the church, I've had opportunities to talk with some of them, because most of those ones kind of live around the temple. Because that's where the biggest concentration of members was at the time as well. So, they've told me about, just working to get the temple built, and how they were just a handful of members in the beginning, and they've seen it grow from a ward and two wards in the city of Lima to tons of stakes now, and it's pretty amazing. But I did serve in Lima for a lot of my time. And the thing is with Lima is that it's a huge city. It has over 8 million people. It's also very spread out. And it's not super modern. just because of, I think, the economic situation that Peru is in. So there's a lot of sort of suburbs of Lima. It's very spread out. But I did have the opportunity to be in the very center of Lima, near the Capitol building and other state and government buildings, which was a very interesting experience, very different because, there are a lot larger buildings, older buildings, things that have very rich history to the country that have been there for, over 100 years have been there. Since the colonization of Spain, and so it's a very interesting city that has a very rich culture. The weather, for one thing, is very strange. It never rains in Lima. I don't really know exactly how it works, but the Andes Mountains are just right pressed up against it, and then they have the coast. And so what ends up happening is the clouds sort of get stuck on the coast between the Andes Mountains, and then from the east they don't really come over the Andes Mountains because they're so tall. And so their city isn't designed for rain. And I was always thinking, if it ever really truly rains here one day, the city's just going to wash away. It's kind of scary. They get more than rain, they get this mist that kind of just comes down because it's very overcast from living on the coast. And so it's very humid, pretty much year round, unless you kind of get away from the coast and go more inland. But it's very, very humid, and the coldest it gets is probably low 60s, which isn't that bad, but combined with humidity, it's really different. 80, 90% humidity sometimes. So it's this strange combination that I had never experienced, but creates a very kind of interesting and unique environment there, because it'll come in the clouds and it'll just everything will just get wet, basically. It won't really rain, but there'll be sort of this mist that just sort of falls, and it's really weird. Yeah, you get a lot of that in the coast and in the inner city of Lima. So that creates for kind of interesting living conditions sometimes. And then as far as transportation goes, mostly the public transportation are buses, taxis. They have other things called combis that are like vans or small buses that act the same way as a bus. And there's so many different routes. It's kind of hard to learn them all, but you get it. You learn which ones are for your area and won't take you outside, and you learn the bus stops. But buses are a huge thing. That's pretty much what most people take. Taxis as well are there, but they're usually more expensive. But they'll definitely get you there quicker. Traffic is nuts in Lima. It's the most insane I've ever seen. I can't believe that they drive just... It would appear without rules, but people have told me, no, there's rules. They're just very subtle, and I don't know. I've watched traffic a lot there. I don't see any rules. People just weave in and out and bump your car, and no big deal. They just keep driving. It's different, and sometimes you're kind of afraid because you're like, okay, like we could definitely get hit right now. Like, I hope we don't. And most of the time you don't. And you hear about accidents every once in a while. They do happen, and they're pretty bad. But surprisingly, there's not as many accidents as you would think. So the housing mostly are tall buildings, kind of in the city, that are basically just pressed together. Apartments, 2, 3, sometimes 4-story apartment complexes that are just very packed together. In the inner city where I was in Lima, it was very old, so those buildings have been standing for over 100 years. And some of them, you can tell, are very deteriorated. And I remember in one part of my area, it didn't happen while I was there, but recently there had been a fire and burnt down this whole area, and it was basically just kind of half standing, and it was just still there. Nobody really cleaned it up. It was just kind of this fallen building. And so the housing is interesting, especially in there, since there's not a lot of space. There'll be roads, and then there's just lots of buildings and walls along the edges of the roads, and there'll be little doors or gates that kind of go down these alleyways, and then inside the alleyways there'll be doors that go to the apartments, and then sometimes there'll be like a staircase at the other end so you can come back up, and just doors on each side, usually very small, and particularly there, they were just very old, so that made it kind of hard for the people. In other areas they had newer, but kind of the same structure, kind of just these squished tall buildings, apartment complexes, and that was pretty much the norm. There weren't really houses with like yards or anything. That didn't really exist. Even in some of the richer areas, it wasn't really that way. They had larger apartments or maybe a whole kind of building that was their house, but they didn't really have anything of a yard or property outside of their house. Everything is built with fences and gates in front of the front door before you get there for safety. So it creates an interesting environment for contacting and knocking doors. No wildlife in Lima, just birds. That's pretty much the only thing around. Safety, basically, just be aware of your surroundings. Just like don't do dumb things, I guess. It's kind of vague, but I feel like most people know, when you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, something bad can happen. The mission and the church provide information for what you should do, to be safe, and it's mostly be obedient and trust in the Lord, and work your hardest, and things will work out. And but in particular, I learned, you can usually pick out things that are suspicious, and know that you probably shouldn't go that way. Listen to the Spirit; He'll help you. But crime is a big thing there. Apart from just like missionary life, but in general life there, it's huge. I don't want to say anything too negative about the country, but there's a lot of corruption within the police and things along those lines. So it can be very dangerous at times. I never really felt endangered at any point in my mission, except for maybe 1 or 2 times, but it all worked out. And I don't know, it's kind of amazing how that happens. We happened to get stopped, you could say, by a couple of kids in one of my areas, and they were asking us for our cell phone, and I didn't want to give it to them. We knew that if we gave them something, they were just going to rob the rest of the stuff we had, and we kind of just talked our way out of it. Honestly, we told them we were missionaries, and I think the Lord provided some safety for us, and we sort of went on our way. But I think it's really key to just be obedient, and you always have your companion, who is, in most cases, is also a native of South America or Central America. So they know usually a little bit better how to deal with certain circumstances and safety. And you learn your area, you learn kind of where the not so great places are and where you shouldn't go after a certain hour. But it all seems to work out so long as you do what's right. But yeah. Well, to start off, the people there are mostly Catholic, by birth, I guess you could say. There's a lot more, like, diversity in religion is is picking up, but most people from the beginning, because of the Spanish influence, were Catholic. And so that plays a lot into their belief system, their culture. Some of them are very closed off to other religious ideas, and others are very open. You kind of get a mix of everything. But they are very, very loving and accepting of you, especially as a missionary coming in the name of God. They will see that as a good thing, regardless of what your beliefs are. If you show them that you're there to help and bless the lives of other people, they will immediately thank you and be very grateful to you. And on multiple occasions, I can remember people saying, "Oh, thank you, brother, for doing this and that." And we didn't know them, they just would be there or would tell us, and as we were walking by, and so that's always heartwarming to get as a missionary as you're working, because sometimes it's very hard because people don't want to listen, but there are people that still respect and love you for that. Culture things, they're a little bit different in their etiquette. I can remember specifically one time we were in the chapel for an activity, and I tossed something to my companion because he asked me. He's like, "Oh, Elder, here, give me this," and he was he was just a little bit away from me, so I tossed it to him, and all the members saw, and they looked at me and were just with this face of horror, just, and my companion was just like, because he was Peruvian as well, and I was just like, "What I do? What did I do?" And I was like, I honestly didn't know. And then he kind of whispered to me, and he's like, "You shouldn't throw things." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I felt so embarrassed because everybody kind of laughed about it, but were also kind of taken back by it. And I just was like, "Oh no, I can never throw anything again," because I remember their faces and just being so startled, "Oh my gosh, I just committed murder." I don't know. So that's something very different. You hand things to people. It's a little bit more, I guess, polite or respectful in that way. They're just kind of, I don't know, I can't really think of an exact example, but they're very polite in that respect of handing things to people, in speaking and interacting, and not being short or curt with somebody. Actually having a conversation with them, and kind of doing all those right things, saying thank you and please, and it's kind of comes from I don't know, I think family backgrounds as well. That definitely plays into some of that. But for the majority, most of them are very proper, or try to be, to have good manners in that regard. Sometimes, we made an effort to talk with everybody around us that we would see, as our time permitted. And a lot of times we would stop, and usually with the women would be more kind hearted, but we'd stop and say hello to them, even if we just said, "Hi, how are you doing?" Sometimes we'd shake their hand. They'd take our hand and wrap their hands around ours and be like, "Oh, thank you, brother, for being here and for preaching the gospel and doing good stuff." And we'd be like, "Well, do you want to hear more?" And a lot of times they'd say, "No, but thank you," and very just loving and wanting to share that they take note of us, and they're very grateful for missionary work, because a lot of them see, especially the older people, can see the deterioration of families and of just bad things that happen, not only in Peru, but all over the world nowadays. Just the influence of the adversary breaking down homes and stuff like that. They're grateful that there are people fighting for good. And so that was one instance. A lot of times, too, when you'd go into a home, they would always offer you a drink or food sometimes. which is sometimes all they have. It's what they would eat or what they were going to have that day, and instead they give it to you. So sometimes we would decline. Other times we'd accept. It just sort of depended on the circumstance. And you can usually tell and see when it's right and appropriate to do that. But you can tell that these people are very, desirous to show you and give you their best when it wasn't even necessary. A lot of times they'd say, we'd walk in and sit down with the parents, and they'd say to their little kids, they'd say, "Oh, hey, here, take," they'd give them 5 or 10 soles to go out and buy a soda and some crackers. And, the kid would run to the little store and come back, and then they'd serve it to us. Without even asking, would just tell their kid, give them the money, go. and that's, a lot for them sometimes. And I noticed that, that happened time after time after time. And it's just, I think, sort of this respect and love that they have for people who come trying to do good, especially, so obviously for the missionaries, they had a great love for them. The food is great. The number one thing is rice. They eat rice in almost every meal, including breakfast and dessert, which is great. Gets a little old after a while, but they love it. The rice and potatoes. Potatoes is probably the second biggest thing. And then after that, chicken. They can make any kind of plate out of those 3 ingredients. And they're really good. I mean, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but they cook very well. They have a lot of seafood dishes as well, since a lot of their industry is based on the sea and the coast and fishing. Their probably most well-known dish is ceviche, which is raw fish that they cook with lime juice. But basically the acid is what cooks the meat. So it is raw fish, but it's safe because the acid actually cleans or kills any of those bad bacteria that might be in the fish. Now you have to be very careful with the preparation. It's not always the safest, so we weren't allowed to eat it as missionaries because you just don't know sometimes who's making it, how they're preparing it, and it's just sometimes very risky. But I had the opportunity to eat it with things other than fish. So, you get the flavor. Everybody says it's a lot better with fish because it's so soft. And they mix it with, so it's fish with this kind of lime juice sauce, or not sauce, I guess, like just juice that's kind of in there with it. And then they put, they'll have sweet potatoes on the side. They have like kernels of corn that they roast, which is a popular thing that they eat. It's kind of like their version of popcorn. They'll mix that in with it. It's called yucca. It's a root. I think in English it's called yucca, like the yucca plant. They mix that in there too. They'll have it on the side. So it's a really interesting dish that you can, that is very Peruvian, and they are very proud of that as well. They'll say, yeah, ceviche, we came up with it. That's our thing. And I've had it with chicken instead of fish, and as well like with octopus, which is it's very good. I mean, they're not kidding. The flavors are great. I can only imagine what it'd be like with fish, because that's how it originally is prepared. Other foods, kind of some crazy things I ate. Guinea pig, which is actually pretty good. I liked it, at least. Sometimes you just don't know what you're eating. And a lot of times I didn't ask. But a lot of times we'd have mondongo, which a lot of Latin missions are accustomed to eating. which is, you know, the intestines or stomach of pretty much any animal, of cows usually. And it's good. The texture is hard to get over. It's probably the number one thing. It's very chewy. Kind of, honestly, I sometimes just couldn't swallow it because I just couldn't break it down. I just chew on it for 5 minutes and wouldn't know what to do with it, and end up sometimes swallowing it whole, sometimes trying to just like spit it back out. Sometimes I just didn't know what to do with it because it was so chewy. But they prepare it in soups as well, which is actually a lot better because it gets a lot softer. But yeah, they also eat chicken feet, intestine. They'll have these stands just on like the sides of the roads, just our outside houses that people do as like little businesses, and they'll just have like a griddle with some fire under it, and they'll just cook intestine and sell it to anybody who comes by. Chicken feet, you know, anything that I guess they wouldn't have sold to the market, because they'll raise chickens and probably sell the good parts to the markets around town, and then sell the rest of the stuff on their own. And people buy it and love it. One thing that's gained a lot of popularity recently, I don't know if a lot is the right word, but they have a drink called Inca Cola that was created and originally produced in Peru. Recently, a couple years ago, it was bought out by the Coca-Cola company. And so now they've been distributing it all around the world. It's a very unique soda. It kind of tastes like bubble gum, people say. But the Peruvians love it. It's the number one drink. So that's kind of an interesting thing, that they've grown this company from something very small, you know, many years ago, and has become international business now, thanks to obviously the Coca-Cola company. But they're so proud of that. You know, they always tell you, oh yeah, well, Inca Cola is the best, and you know, now it's going around all the world because Coke bought it, and they're gonna make it and distribute it to everyone around the world, so everybody can enjoy Inca Cola. It's kind of funny.
Craziest food you had in Peru?
I'd say guinea pig is probably the craziest.
Crazy, most dangerous experience?
I had kind of told you about it. We got jumped. We kind of just talked to them, tried to calm them down, told them that we were missionaries and we really didn't have anything. We gave them some little pass-along cards of Jesus Christ, and we were on our way.
One of the most important spiritual or life lessons you learned on your mission?
What was the question? Spiritual or
It's like one of the most important lessons you learned while on your mission.
Most important lessons. I think that's a hard one. Probably just loving others, and learning how to love them, and that's what God really wants for you as a missionary, is to love everyone.
Greatest skill you gained?
I think it would probably have to be how to love other people that are different and don't necessarily always share your same beliefs or views on things, whether inside or outside of the church, but learning to see the good in them and to love them for who they are.
One of the times you felt the Spirit the strongest, or most spiritual experience?
There's a little bit of a story with that, but we taught a man who lived alone. He was preparing to get baptized, but he was thinking 6 months to a year down the line. And we were trying to teach him that that much preparation wasn't necessary. And we invited him to read the Book of Mormon to pray about it. And he said he would. And when we went back, he said he had prayed, and he was ready to get baptized that month. And when he shared with us his testimony of the Book of Mormon, it was incredible. I had never felt the Spirit so strongly in all my life. And it had come from the simple, humble testimony of a man who had read and prayed with real intent about the Book of Mormon. And it was just another confirming witness to me that this book is true, and that anyone can gain a testimony of it. And yeah.
Awesome. Craziest weather?
It wasn't that bad ever. I wasn't even really in this area. We were just there for a Christmas conference, but it had rained pretty hard. It was during the rainy season in the mountains of the Andes, and so it just kind of came in from one moment to the other. It just got really cold and just started pouring on us, and we just had to work through it for the rest of the night, just out in the rain. But yeah.
Best piece of mission prep advice you could give?
I think there's a couple things. From a more like general sort of perspective is learn to feel and be sensitive to the Spirit. And then kind of more like in a study setting is learn Preach My Gospel. If you can understand and start learning Preach My Gospel beforehand, you'll be so much better off.
What do you admire most about Peruvians?
They are very loving people. It's kind of amazing how they'll accept and respect you, even if they don't agree with you. They're so loving and so caring towards others.
Funny language mistake, if you have one.
In the early part of my mission, I would just try and repeat a lot of the things that I heard. And so sometimes I didn't always know what they meant. And so I would just sort of like say the phrase, but I didn't actually know the words or where the spaces were between the words. And so sometimes my companion would look at me and be like, wait, what? Because I'd just be throwing out a sound, sort of just trying to repeat what I had heard. And I didn't always get that right.
It's hardest experience you went through? Or one of the hardest?
I had a companion that didn't get along very well with me. He didn't really want to work at all. And that was a very challenging transfer. But I learned a lot from that transfer. I feel like that's usually how it goes. I learned a lot about loving him and understanding the challenges that he was facing. Would I want to go through it again? Probably not. But it was a very good experience, but it was very hard.
And then finally, best advice you could give to someone just returning home from their mission?
Give it time. Don't freak out because you don't know what's going on. You'll want to know, you want to be back, part of the world, know what's going on. It's not going to happen. Just give it time, and don't push yourself too hard. Everything will just kind of come back, and you'll be able to figure things out with time. Go with the flow. That's probably the biggest thing when you're getting out into the mission. Don't try and fight anything. Don't get too worked up about anything. Just kind of go with what's going on around you, and everything will work out. Well, I think learning to love the people will be huge, huge for you in your mission. That's something that obviously any missionary should do, but the quicker you can seek that out and learn to love and respect them despite their differences or different belief systems, you'll be able to work that much harder to help them. I also think that going in with the attitude that you can do this is really important, because there'll be hard days, and you're not bad for having doubts and saying, this is hard, maybe I don't want to do this. That's not wrong. You just have to learn to say, yes, I can do this, and this is good. And being obedient will create that desire in you to keep working hard and to keep doing everything that you're supposed to. The biggest thing that I learned, and that I think that any missionary should live by, is exact obedience, to strive for that. Obviously, you're not going to be perfect, but as you strive to do everything that you're supposed to, and that you've been called to do, you'll find peace and joy in doing that in the proper way that the Lord and your leaders will teach you. And it'll be hard, obviously, but when you make those mistakes, the most important thing is to learn from those mistakes and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do to be better now. And that changes those mistakes or errors into blessings, because from that moment on, you're better. Each time you can keep being better and keep being better. And by the end of your mission, you'll see that you've changed so much, even though you won't have necessarily felt it in the time. You'll see at the end that you've become a lot more like your Savior. And I think that's a huge part of being a missionary. And yeah, I guess just learn to work hard and to not worry too much about things, and trust in the Lord that everything will work out.